We have a good amount of our attendees who have been able to make it into the room. For those of you who are continuing to join us, that's totally fine, but we are going to go ahead and get started. I just want to begin. My name is Kari Murphy. I'm the Assistant Executive Director and Director of Diversity here at the Columbus Bar Association. And on behalf of the Columbus Bar Association, welcome. Thank you for being here. This is our third and final of a series that we've been working through in our community conversations on race and the criminal justice system. Now, this particular conversation is focusing on one portion of that system, and it's looking at parole, probation, and becoming productive. Here to offer their insights today, we have Irene Lyons, Mark Collins, Dr. Mike Davis, and Lori Francescon. Thank you to you all for being here. Real quickly, I just want to go over the format for today's presentation. The conversation will begin with our guests introducing themselves and then offering a little bit of background on their experience in this area. From there, they'll lead us in a brief overview of the topic to help guide the conversation today. The remaining time that we have together will be devoted to answering questions from you, our attendees, weighing in on the things that are important to you. You will be able to submit your questions using the Q&A function via Zoom. For those of you who are participating today with your phone, the Q&A function is up at the top, right beside the end button. So be careful not to use that one, right? For those of you who are participating on a computer, the Q&A function is also usually, it's either at the top or the bottom, just depending on the type of computer that you're using. That will send all the questions directly to me, and then I will then pitch those back out to our guests. As with many of our community conversation topics, these are issues that can inspire passion, conviction, anger, and sometimes even deep pain. Our community conversations are an environment where respect, curiosity, and empathy are not just encouraged, they are in fact required. Questions or comments that fall short of that requirement will not be addressed. Again, on behalf of the Columbus Bar Association, thank you all for being here. Thank you for your openness and your willingness to engage in productive dialogue and for leaning into one of the pressing issues of our day. I'm going to go ahead and begin with introductions, and I'm going to send the ball over to Dr. Mike Davis.
Good afternoon, Kari, and everyone. Thank you for providing this opportunity for meaningful discussion around an issue that is near and dear, certainly to my heart. As you mentioned before, I work with the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction. I currently serve as the Chief of Recreation and Religious Services. I've been fortunate over my career to serve in several capacities for the department. I've been a Deputy Warden of Special Services at one of our correctional facilities. I worked in the communications office for our agency, and also served as the chief of the Office of Reentry and Enterprise Development for 3.5 years. My introduction to the Department of Corrections came in 1998, where I worked in the Office of Victim Services, serving to represent those who've been impacted directly by crime and violence, by those who are in our correctional facilities. My roles over the course of these now many years, I believe gives me a general understanding from various perspectives of how our agency's policies and practices specifically impacts those who are overrepresented in the system, both as incarcerated persons and persons impacted by crime and violence and in the community. Prior to my work with DRC, I spent about 4.5 years at the Columbus Urban League under the tutelage of former President Sam Gresham and Vice President Otha Meadows. And in between that time, Kari, I served as a crime prevention coordinator at the Office of Criminal Justice Services, where I got an opportunity to really look at the criminal justice system in its entirety. And so those unique perspectives I'd like to bring to this conversation today. So thanks again for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here. Let's move on here to Irene Lyons.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to this conversation. I have been with the department for close to 30 years. I spent most of my career in the legislative office, working on policy decisions for the department between the legislature and the administration. So I served 5 administrations. In my legislative role, I've been with the Office of Reentry for almost 4 years, and prior to coming to DRC, I'm actually from the state up north, and it hasn't been held against me. But I worked with Detroit, the city of Detroit 911, as an emergency operator for 5 years. I also worked with the probate court for 2 years in Michigan, as well as doing some, here in Ohio, I am a certified public manager, and that's really how I got engaged with criminal justice initiatives. I was a team leader or project leader for transitioning high security offenders back into Ohio's communities. And I led a team of individuals who had no criminal justice experience at all to create a curriculum for individuals who would be returning to Ohio's communities who were high risk and high security. In doing so, I've learned a lot about the individuals who are returning to our communities. I also, as part of my role, am the statewide coordinator for the Certificate of Qualification for Employment, and I'll give more details when we're into the discussion. But what brought me here, or my passion, is we are in a people business. And I believe that we have to engage the people that we serve. And those individuals have served their time, and they are open to another opportunity to come back to society. So that's what got me here. I'm very passionate. I'm very honored to be here, and look forward to the discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Mark, we will jump over to you. In just one moment.
There you go. How's that? Better?
Perfect.
Thank you, Kari. I appreciate the invitation and the chance to share some ideas and exchange some information with both the fellow members of the panel as well as the participants. A little bit about myself. I'm from the New York area. I went to undergrad at Cornell University and then went to business school at State University of New York at Binghamton. Came to Columbus to go to law school so I could avoid the workforce for another 3 years. Met my wife in law school. She said I was welcome to go back to New York. She wasn't, so that's why we live here. Started out with Mike Miller's office as an assistant county prosecutor. Was there from 1993 to 96. Went with a big law firm who represented police unions, teacher unions, and things of that nature in the Ohio Education Association for about 4 or 5 years. Became a partner there and specialized in representing police officers and teachers when they got in trouble. And then in 2000, started my own firm. And I primarily work in federal court and common pleas. And I have a wonderful staff and an associate who do a great job. And I've been asked today to try to give some real examples of systems that are in place and maybe some unintended consequences and how they affect criminal defendants in our system. I think this is my 28th year of practice. And I look forward to listening and learning and exchanging some information today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mark. And last but certainly not least, we have Lori. Go ahead and please introduce yourself. Looks like we'll do that in just one moment here. And okay.
Okay. Are we good?
Yes.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much for the invitation and the opportunity today to engage in this dialogue. You know, it's relevant to our time. It's long overdue, and I'm really excited to participate in difficult conversations in a constructive manner. A little bit about myself. I've been with the Franklin County Court of Common Pleas for the last 27 years. I've worked in, I started out my career working at the community-based correctional facility, which is the acronym is the Franklin County CBCF. And for those who aren't familiar, the CBCF is a residential facility likened to between a jail and a halfway house. That program provides programming for residents who were sentenced there as an alternative to prison. Programming provides employment services, education services, substance abuse, cognitive behavioral programming. I was a resident advisor there, managing the safety and security of the building. A case manager, which is the touch point person who's helping the resident navigate their way through the program, does a lot of direction and planning of the services while engaged in the program, as well as a manager for that facility. Spent 5 years in residential programming and then transitioned to the adult probation department, where I've spent the last 22 years. And again, having varied experiences in the probation department, I've been a probation officer supervising a general caseload, spent a significant amount of time supervising the sex offender population that we supervise, and then certainly has been in supervisory and management roles, as well as now as the chief probation officer within our agency. And so in preparation for our conversation today and reflecting back upon my career and trying to identify some pivotal moments, if you will, and I'd like to share a story, if you don't mind, of an experience that I had as a young female in the criminal justice system, working at the CBCF, and I was a case manager there. And as I said, a case manager drives the program outline for those residents that participate. And I was working with a gentleman by the name of Walter. And Walter was a 49-year-old African-American male who had a significant criminal history and drug abuse history. And through the course of our interaction, I was going over the rules and regulations of the facility and all of the things that he was going to need to do in order to complete. As part of that intake process, urine screen needed to be submitted, and he submitted a positive screen for opiates. So I'm having a conversation with Walter, and I'm saying, so Walter, you're in this program, these are the guidelines, these are the things that you must do. It is evident that you have a lengthy criminal history and that you have a drug abuse history, and if you don't stop that behavior, you're not going to be successful, and it's likely that you're going to go back to prison. So I'm here to help you change your behavior and make changes so that you can be a positive citizen back in the community. I have the answers. We're going to walk through this program. I'm going to sign you up for the classes. I'm going to refer you to community resources. I'm going to direct where you can go and when you can do it. I'm here to help you, and we're going to be great together. And Walter very calmly looks at me, and he says, ma'am, I'm a 49-year-old African-American male. You have absolutely no idea of my experiences and where I've been. If you think that I'm going to take advice or direction from a young white female, you're sadly mistaken. And I was like, what? This is my role. I'm in this facility. I'm here to guide you through this facility to make productive change, and that you're going to be successful. It was an incredibly pivotal moment. It was kind of ground shaking. Like, I totally missed the fact of what was important to him and getting beyond just what was on the piece of paper that was presented to me. And so I share that experience in the sense of, as we continue in this conversation, talking about the evolution of community supervision or probation supervision. There was a time in this career where we were very compliance-driven, very directive, and the type of supervision that we engage in today is more around risk reduction and reducing recidivism. And there's active, direct engagement from a probation officer with the probationer, and looking to identify those specific areas that contribute to that risky behavior. And so I think there's a lot of conversation to be had around that, and I'm certain that all three of our panelists can contribute to that conversation as well. So just a little bit of background and just an experience, a pivotal moment in my career relevant to the discussion that we're going to have today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. Now that we've introduced each of our panelists, I do want to give an opportunity for each of them to share some brief remarks. And for those of you who have been a part of our earlier conversation series, you understand during this time, it just helps to sort of guide our conversation. Some of you are going to be old pros who already are very familiar with these topics, but I know there are others that just understand that this is part of a larger system that potentially could use some reform, or there's already reform taking place and you're just trying to learn more about what that looks like. So for the benefit of those folks, we are going to allow each of our panelists an opportunity to share with us. I do also want to encourage you in the meantime to go ahead and submit your questions. You do not have to wait for any particular portion of the program to do that. As the questions come in, I will organize them in case there are some that are similar, and then we'll pitch them back out at the time when we're actually actively fielding questions. But certainly in the meantime, as things come up, or if somebody says something that you feel requires some clarification, please submit those now, okay? And from there, whoever would like to start, I don't want you all to just race to the unmute button at once, but whoever would like to start, I will allow whoever jumps in first to go ahead.
Irene. So I'll start out by saying some things that people may already be familiar with, but just some statistics and some data. So 1 in 6 Ohioans have had an encounter with the criminal justice system, and that could be arrest to incarceration in a prison. That means that's about 2 million of the 11 million people here in the state have had an encounter with the justice system. There are about 800 collateral consequences that people face once they have entered the criminal justice continuum. And I say that because part of my job is every day to hear stories from individuals who have completed their incarceration and have turned a page in their life, and they're ready to move forward. And those collateral consequences, which is their conviction, hinders them from moving forward with employment opportunities and housing opportunities and transportation, and just their whole life is turned upside down because of a collateral consequence. And that collateral consequence could be something minor as one misdemeanor offense 10 years ago. It could be their record has been expunged. However, an employer can still see that one offense that they did in college. It could be that they never even went to prison or went to jail, that they just received a ticket, a subpoena, a citation to come to court to be fined for an event. So, and I listened to those stories, but more importantly, when working on the project to transition high security offenders back into our society, we talked to these individuals who had behaved badly, because that's how they got to high security. And when you have a conversation, when you actually sit down one-on-one with individuals to find out what's really going on with you and why are you here and what are your plans when you leave, many of them have never ever had anyone listen to them, listen to what they had to say, whether it was in childhood, whether it was when they became an adult. So the first time they ever had someone listen to what they had to say, whether we agreed with what they had to say or not, was very important to them. And it was a turning point for me in my career, because I realized that they were no different from Irene Lyons, who grew up in the inner city of Detroit, who could have become a product of her environment, or we believe we become products of our environment, but all the time we don't, because you can live in a zip code and not necessarily become that zip code's culture. And I think that that's what society believes, that if I live in a certain zip code, that I'm going to turn out to be a certain person, or I'm more likely than not to go to prison. And I know people do research and they have data that says that, but I can sit here on this panel and say I came from one of those zip codes, and I currently live in one of those zip codes, and I am not a product of the criminal justice system. So I think that when we look at individuals and having the conversations with these folks who were so happy to hear, to have someone to listen to what they had to say, and to care that, you know, I don't ever want to come back to prison. This could have been their first number or their 10th number. And for whatever reason, at that point, it became pivotal to them that I need to do something different with my life. And I can tell you a story about one guy who really sticks in my mind. He had been to prison. The first time he did 6 months. The second time he did 18 months. The third time he was serving 5 years. During that 5-year incarceration, his mother passed away. He was the only individual in his family who had ever been to prison, who had ever touched the criminal justice system. And he said to me that my mom always told me to make the best of my incarcerations. And now she's not here, and I have made a decision to be the man that she raised me to be. And he did everything that he was supposed to do to better himself. He took programs that were things that he could use when he was released from prison. And he was also a mentor to other guys in that unit. And I think that when we as criminal justice professionals look at people as numbers, or become complacent in our job descriptions and not really look at the individual, because we sometimes think that, you know, each case is the same. Oh, they came from here, so they did this crime. But individually, they all have suffered some sort of trauma that led them to the criminal activity, and they want to do better. They want to do something different, but they need that guidance. They need the person who is going to listen to what they have to say, but also do a Lori and say, look, I'm here to guide you through this, and you know what you did was wrong. You know that even being in a high security prison got here because of your behavior. Why did you act out? And talk through those things with that individual. And these guys didn't know me from Adam. They looked at me as some, high, someone high in the system who, was just going to be a bureaucrat and not really care about getting them what they needed, or, what is this program about? But I involved them. I asked them, what do you need in order to be successful? And how can our department assist you with that? And listening to them and taking into consideration, along with all the staff at the institution, from the warden down to the correction officer who would be working with those individuals, we came up with a comprehensive guide of recommendations. And I can say that unit is still up and running, and those individuals, it's kind of like a community for them, and they have to take responsibility and kind of grow up and know that, you know, I no longer want to be I don't no longer want to participate in that kind of activity. I want to be positive. I want to be a productive member. And so when they know that the collateral consequences are, or believe that they're going to subject them to not being able to be employed, then that is when I can talk to them about the certificate of qualification for employment. And that certificate has been around since 2013, and it allows individuals with criminal histories to apply to the Common Pleas Court in the county where they reside to lift that collateral consequence. And I can tell you right now, over 1,400 have been approved by the courts. So they're not giving them out like candy, but they are, the courts do review them, they take them seriously. And the individuals who are applying for those certificates are looking to become nurses. I've had physicians apply to get their license back. I've had accountants apply to get their license back. I've had folks apply to want to be veterinarians. I mean, it runs the gamut. And there's also people who just want to work at Amazon. I just want to work at Amazon and be able to take care of my family. So, you know, I think that my work is important when it comes to the certificate of qualification for employment, because it's the one barrier that lifts the person back into where they feel they can be a father, a mother, you know, a parent to their child, to their family. And so I work with many community partners and the individuals I track that I have assisted. And I can tell you that they all feel like if no one ever listened to them, that they would become another number with DRC. So thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing. I think that's super helpful to help, like I said, help guide our conversation. Is there anybody who feels like theirs would be a natural transition from here?
Well, Kari, that would be, I think that might be my cue. Let me just say this, that this is such a timely topic and such a timely discussion. I know Irene has had these conversations, and I have as well, with many of our community partners and organization leaders and agencies. And this whole idea of prison reform, and what is prison reform? What does prison reform look like? And so one of the things that as a representative of the Ohio prison system, I've had the opportunity to do is really share where our heart is. Irene mentioned, you know, this is a people business, and statistics aside, that is 100% correct. It's about people. Our current director, Annette Chambers-Smith, who took office last year, 2019, one of the first conversations I had with her, she says, Mike, I really want to address the whole person while they're with us, mind, body, and soul. And to that end, then our treatments, our services have to be aligned that promote a salutogenic environment, a wellness-producing environment versus a pathogenic or disease or trauma-producing environment. And so to that end, Ohio has sought and continues to seek sort of coordinated approaches to successful reentry and return and integration for Ohioans who have an incarceration experience. And so with the best intentions, insights, and skills acquired by justice-involved men and women through prison-based programming, we understand that can all fall apart if these individuals are not likewise nurtured in the community. And so it takes a balanced approach. Us on the inside seeking to provide programming that works in partnership with communities, those that represent structural factors that lead to communities that have high levels of efficacy for those returning from prison to the community. We acknowledge that to effectively address recidivism, it is necessary to develop these strong partnerships with employers, the faith-based community, law enforcement, and others. We recognize that when it comes to incarcerated Ohioans returning to the community, being crime-free is important, but it is not enough. We want people to not only not recidivate, but we want them to be the citizens that we need them to be and the citizens that we expect them to be. So to that end, we have several goals in our overarching plan for reentry, and that includes the seamless and successful transition of individuals that come to us from prison to community, and then again beyond to fully be integrated into the very fabric of local communities and a society. We want them to be better prepared to return home than when they came to us. We know statistically that the majority of individuals who come to prison come from communities that are characterized by social and economic disparities and inequalities, right? They have a higher level of unemployment and lack livable wage jobs and things of that nature. And so those individuals come to us. Our goal is to equip them to be better prepared to return home. We want to provide those marketable skills that enable more productivity, because the reality is those individuals that come from this very concentrated portion of our communities are returning to those same communities. And so we are trying to prepare them, provide them with the treatments, the services, the skills, so that they can support themselves and maintain a distance from criminal activity. We want them to be responsible parents, supporting their children and families, and we want to provide them with effective coping skills. And so one of the key factors, I think, for us, Kari, and those listening, has been a move from sort of my gut feeling based implementation of programs. Hey, I think this will work. I think that will work, to a risk need responsivity model. Doug Marlowe, who is a consultant with the National Association of Drug Court Professionals, I know he said, hey, if you don't have a validated risk assessment tool, you're really operating on a 50-50 chance that a program may work. It may result in those positive effects that it's intended to. But with a validated risk tool, we can create a plan for a person that meets their risk and need. And when we say risk, we're not talking about risk based on offense type, but risk based on the propensity to reoffend, to violate conditions of parole and probation. And so I think one of the things that's been big, not only for us here in Ohio, but across the country, is the use of these validated risk instruments. In Ohio, our partnership with the University of Cincinnati has resulted in the use of the development of the Ohio Risk Assessment System, and for the youth, the Ohio Youth Assessment System. And so these validated risk instruments help us align programs to the specific risk for the individuals that we endeavor to serve. And so that's been consequential. It limits potential for bias, implicit bias, overt prejudice, and indifference of staff, giving them the tools to better assist those individuals we're trying to respond to, has been, I think, critical in our success, and whatever success we hope to have will be predicated on us continuing to search out models that lend themselves to the tools, to the methods and strategies that meet the needs of people where they are.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Davis. Moving right along, again, I'll open it up for anybody who feels like they're a natural follow.
Sorry,
yeah.
this may be a good time for me, so then Lori can clean up any of the mistakes I make about probation, stuff like that. So if that's all right with you, Lori, I'll go next. In preparing for this today, ladies and gentlemen, I looked back through my 27 years and some of the issues I've seen with regards to disparate racial treatment in our criminal justice system. And I kind of came up with a concept of, from the beginning of a case until the end of a case. And I tried to talk to some people recently about this, and I became frustrated because I kept running into problems and roadblocks and things that occurred, and I felt frustrated that I didn't have any answers. And so I bumped into Kathy Carrillo today, and for those who you don't know her, she is the head of the Common Pleas Public Defender's Office, does a great job, and I respect her highly. In our brief conversation, she said something that really made an impact on me. She said, look, we need less people charged, less people in our court system, less people in prison, and less people on parole. So how do we get there? So that's kind of how I've changed my analysis to try to talk about these things today. And I think Dr. Davis said it best. The criminal justice system starts, unfortunately, with too many people getting pulled over or arrested from different social and economic disparate neighborhoods. And unfortunately, that's the large volume that start in the criminal justice process. And one of the things, the first inhibitor that is very difficult in Ohio, and a lot of times I apologize, I'm going to compare our state and municipal system to our federal system, and you'll see why. But many times in Ohio, the initial hurdle for people from that social and economic environment or neighborhood or community is the aspect of bond. So we know we have a large proportion, too large proportion of those individuals getting pulled over and getting arrested. Then you come to bond, okay? Too many times my clients cannot make bond. They have no chance at bond. And bond is, the municipal court judges give a higher bond because they don't want to let the felons out before the person gets indicted. So then the person's sitting there for 10 days. And unfortunately in municipal court, many times people will plead to something knowing they're going to be on probation just to get out of jail. Their only focus of my clients initially is whether they have an addiction, whether they have important needs in terms of family members to get out, is how do I get out of jail? They will do anything they can to get out of jail, and they'll plead anything they can. And just like Irene said, that starts them then with a conviction. It starts them with a misdemeanor on their record or a felony on the record. So we need to change our bond system. And the federal system is so much different. The federal system basically is you are released or detained depending on the certain offenses. However, you have multiple hearings on it, and there is not a monetary aspect to it. So our state municipal system has a monetary aspect, and the federal system, it doesn't. So when you talk about the first hurdle, it's there. It's impossible to get over. I mean, how do I can have one client have a murder case. I have two clients right now who are out on bond on murder cases because they can afford a $250,000 bond, or they can afford a $500,000 bond. Then my other clients are like, why can't you get me out? Why can't you get me out? It's the bond aspect that is really difficult. So then we're past the initial appearance of the bond, and now your case is pending. And different cases in and of themselves have roadblocks for my clients. And what I mean by roadblocks is, let's just take the concepts, and all the concepts are well intended, but the diversionary concept with the prosecutor's office, great concept in general. Unfortunately, very few of my indigent clients can ever go through the diversion program because the program requires you to pay the money up front, pay the fees up front. You can only have $1,200 of outstanding restitution to get into that program. You can't have a prior record. You can't have anything of that nature. You can't have any drug offenses. So unfortunately, even though it's a proper goal of the diversion program, the unintended consequences are it really negatively affects the people of color and minorities and the people from those social and economic neighborhoods who just can't afford that process. So it's good for my clients who can have the means to get into diversion, and it's terrible for my other clients. It's just a very frustrating aspect. Other cases are gun cases. I mean, I promise you, I can't prove this or anything, but the amount of people driving around with guns in a neighborhood in Columbus, in Linden or something like that versus another neighborhood in Central Ohio, it's not that different. But the amount of people who are getting pulled over with guns in their car is different. And then the amount of people in court. I can have a citizen, let's say a male white who has no record, and I can get them from a gun charge, improper handling, or a CCW, a potential reduction to a misdemeanor. They go do a CCW class, they go to another training, they show their employment, they show everything's going at work. I show that maybe they lose their job with a felony on their record, and okay, I'm usually successful on that. Let's fast forward to someone else, the exact same situation, no record. I have an African-American client who doesn't have a very good job, or who's temporary job, and they lost the job because of the pending charge. They can't afford to go in the CCW class. They can't afford to get the counseling or the things that I'm requesting. Unfortunately, they end up pleading to usually a felony, then being on felony probation. And then we talk about that vicious cycle that Irene talked about, where they're just in this never-ending wheel spinning around of trying to get out, trying to sponge their case, and they're put back. They're put back 3 or 4 steps compared to other defendants in this similar situated thing. Let's see, I apologize. Let's go to probation real quick, okay? Just some of the things that I see, and again, I apologize if I'm complaining. Well, before we get to probation, you're determined sentencings, okay? When you determine sentencings in the federal system, it's driven by the guidelines. There is no racial color on the guidelines. Everyone is supposed to be treated fairly, and for the most part that happens because it takes the personal opinions and the issues out of it. There's no comment really by the U.S. Attorney's Office on what they think he or she in terms of attendant should get. All my plea bargaining and common pleas, I have to listen to prosecutors say, well, I'll give you this deal if you agree to 2 years in prison, or I'll give you that deal and this. They have too much input in there. They actually are usurping the authority of the judge. And yes, I want joint recommendations, and yes, I want to resolve my cases, but there's too much input from the prosecutor's office into potential sentencing. Now, in federal court, they give a sentencing memorandum. They put that there, but you know where you're arguing because of the guidelines. So I think if our state system could switch a little bit, and again, this goes to the next level, punishment. If I represent someone in Cincinnati, Cleveland, Columbus in a felony, I'm pretty sure I know what's going to be the general outcome. If I go outside of those counties, ladies and gentlemen, you can't understand the difference and the disparate treatment that all defendants are given versus that. Now, if I represent someone in the Northern District of Ohio or in Michigan or maybe in the New York City in federal court, I am on the same playing field with all of my clients. All of them, because it's off of the guidelines. So that's some way, an examples of how the federal system is so much more fair, and how, you know, my goal is to try to get our state system there. And again, I know it's an altruistic goal, but it's something that needs to be done. Some experiences of probation, and unfortunately I'm very old and I've been in the system for a long time. When I first started as a county prosecutor, you would have old male white judges determining the conditions of probation. Now, how in the hell can that individual know anything that's going on, even if probation does a full PSI, with my client and the socioeconomic background and the things that person goes through in their life? And so I've seen the progress and the transition to the needs-based and the risk reduction, and I applaud it. I applaud everything about it, and it's a great goal. However, what I see from my clients on there is that they do a great job, probation does, in terms of getting them off probation, having them complete probation. However, sometimes where the failing is they're not getting them enough help. And again, people of no means. People of means have the families pay for the counselors, pay for the extra things, pay for the extra monitoring, and have a better chance at success after probation. So what I see is a lot is once a person's off probation, they're back into that situation without a support network, without any family in place and things of that nature. And again, that's where the recidivism comes to. Now, again, lots of progress in probation, and I'm very, very happy about that. One of the things I'd be interested, Lori, down the road is Probation has had to change lately since COVID. A lot of times I have prosecutors, you know, a year ago, well, I want this person to check in this amount of time, that amount of time. I want this, 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 and this. And probation officers have their reporting. You have to call in or you have to come in. And the idea is, in theory, that the more they're regulated and the more strict it is, in theory, hopefully you can catch them before a problem comes up or before issues happen. And I agree with that. I would be very interested in the next few months, once this pandemic leaves, is what happened during COVID, meaning probation was shut down in March, April, and May. Clients couldn't report. They could phone in. They couldn't go there in person. The drug testing decreased. And you know, people will probably think, well, geez, crime must have went way up or they must have been reoffended. I'm not seeing that. My clients are doing the same stuff they were, even though they're not reporting as much. So those types of things, you know, reoffending and things of that nature, I would love to see that information after the fact. Parole, thank goodness that Dr. Davis and Lori are here, because from a defense standpoint, the issues that we have in our system is you guys are like the unknown to us. And I know as a defense bar, we have to do a better job of reaching out to you guys, finding more information. But I unfortunately find myself in a situation where I can resolve my state case, but my client says, hey, I'm on post-release control, I'm on this, I'm on that. Well, what do you think is going to have happen? Well, my parole officer says I'm going to be fine. Then I resolve it, the person goes away then for 6 months, 9 months of this. And again, I make calls, they call back, but we just never know. They can't really give us an exact answer. Whereas in federal court, if someone is on supervised release after they've been incarcerated, I can talk to that person, and that person will say, Mark, I am recommending this much. If your client pleads on the new federal case, we're going to give him exactly this much. So that communication between common pleas, court, and the parole system, I know that, again, the defense bar has to do a better job, but the more communication we can get, the better we can help serve our clients in resolving our cases. Because again, their motivation is get out of jail. I'll plead to whatever I can to get out of jail, and then I'll worry about my post-release control hearing and things of that nature. Some of the other aspects, positives of some things I've seen in the 27 years, our county, specifically Franklin County, has done an outstanding job on drug treatment and probationary things and parole aspects of treatment of drugs. And I think you heard Lori earlier say that 27 years ago, she started at CBCF. I remember touring that facility as a young prosecutor going, wow. And I find myself, even today, I had a sentencing in front of Judge Page, and my person went to CBCF. I would have thought by now we'd have something different, but again, I think they do a wonderful job on the treatment of drugs. But when I look at behind the scenes, or I ask myself why, it's because, you know, that stuff's in the press. The opioid crisis is in the press. The legislators make a big deal out of it. They make it a huge political issue, and a ton of money is thrown at that. So I see that. But now if you compare that, the worst thing I see in our criminal justice system is how we do as a whole with the mental health issues. Most of the people on the streets, most of the people in jail, they have no chance. They are in jail because of mental health issues, addictions, or some of the other ones are just evil. But we do just a horrible job as a group on mental health. And again, it comes down to funding, it comes down to education. But those mental health cases, they're not the ones in the media. They're not the ones that the governor or the attorney general is having press conferences on and things of that nature, or the insurance companies are paying for treatment, or Suboxone or Vivitrol and things like that. So that's kind of what I see in terms of the negatives. The other thing in terms of parole and probation, the individual officers, and again, I think Dr. Davis said this earlier, to make it kind of neutral, but we see a lot of personality differences, and 90% of them are our client's fault, not the probation officer's fault. But I see a lot of logistical issues or cultural issues coming into play. I've represented 20 Somalian defendants in the past year, 2-3 years. I'm having difficulty with them on probation because I can't get my client to relate to the person on probation. Just like Irene said, you know, a 49-year-old male black was not going to listen to a younger female white. I'm getting the same thing from probation from my clients who aren't going to listen to a person who doesn't know their culture, who doesn't understand where they came from. So maybe a little bit more diversity in the hiring, a Somalian, Latino, Hispanic, things of that nature. And again, these are just, I guarantee you that most 90 to 95% of the problems are my client's fault and not probation, but those are the issues that they complain to me about. Let's see. Types of cases, you guys, where I would like to change things or talk about change today or potential changes is I would like to front load everything. And what do I mean by that? I'll give you 2 examples. I have a person named Jennifer. Okay, Jennifer gets charged in federal court, and when I went to her initial appearance, she didn't know what day it was. Okay, now what they did there is they would not release her. However, they placed her in a treatment facility. They gave her a plan, and once she completed certain things, she then got released. There is no bond aspect. There is no money aspect. Now, Jennifer went through the process. Everything was front loaded. While the case was pending for 8 months, she completed inpatient, outpatient, continued her counseling. They set her up with a job. The federal government paid for all of this. And then what happened was she was in a much better successful point when the case was over. She has a better chance of her because she had been through the state system. State system, that exact same charge, she would have bonded out probably with recognizance or a low bond. She would have been right back out on the streets using, and she would have been reoffending and going, and that process would continue, that vicious cycle. So if we could front load the things we're doing now and change the way we think about those things, change the way we think about child support cases. I can't tell you how frustrating it is when I have an affluent person on a child support case and I can pay a chunk of money and I can get a misdemeanor, but then I have an indigent person or a person of color who owes maybe $1,200 in back child support and is trying to pay, but I have to eat a felony or even a misdemeanor. That person then, how's that person supposed to obtain a better job? How is that person then supposed to pay the fees and things like that? I think child support cases should be changed the whole way that they're done in our system, as well as in the municipal court. And I'm sure you've all heard these complaints, is the BMV and the driving. We need people to be able to get to work. We need them to drive to work, and we need to make it less restrictive on them in terms of fines, fees at the BMV. I mean, we all know going to the BMV is brutal. How would you like to go to the BMV when you don't have a good driving record, when maybe you owe $600 or $700, you're on assistance, you only have a certain amount of money, everything is stacked up against you, and then it just keeps repeating and repeating and repeating. So those are the kind of things that I wanted to share about some of the frustrations or some of the issues that I run into, and I'm looking forward to people's open conversation about that, and I appreciate the time.
Thank you so much, Mark. It was a lot of information that you covered in a very short period of time, and we appreciate you sharing that. Before we move on to Lori, I just want to remind everyone, if you have a question, go ahead and submit that via the Q&A function. It looks like we have a few people who are trying to use the raise hand function, and in this setting, the questions are to be submitted via the Q&A function. So it's a little thing, it says Q&A. If you're on an iPhone or other telephone, it's up towards the top of your device. You may have to click on your device in order to bring up the menu. If you're on a computer, it's typically at the bottom. But without any further ado, Lori, please share your thoughts with us.
Okay. Oh, okay. Can you hear me now? Okay, great. Certainly appreciate all of the comments from the 3 panelists. And as I was sitting here listening and coming behind Mark, trying to gather up all my thoughts in a sequential manner of the information that he shared, I'm probably going to bounce around a little bit. But what I did hear is some overarching themes in working with those individuals who are in our criminal justice system. And if I can just speak to a couple things, especially from Irene, some of the things I heard from her is really around that relationship building and building trust. That is actually a risk reduction strategy, if you will. It is a very specific risk reduction strategy when you're talking about supervision of individuals in the criminal justice system. We have a framework of supervision in the probation system that incorporates evidence-based practices and risk reduction strategies. And one of the number one, probably in the top 4, I would say, risk reduction strategies is building a positive relationship and building trust with the probationer that one is supervising. It is incredibly important that probation or any community corrections environment present themselves in a manner that they are an advocate for their current situation and their future. And so when we talk about what's happening today and what's going to happen in the future, risk reduction supervision, again, it's not just about what's happening today in their life, it's what's going to be happening further on down the road. And Dr. Davis spoke to it in the use of utilizing criminogenic risk assessment tools. And we too use that criminogenic risk assessment tool, and that tool identifies a probationer's level of risk to reoffend, as well as identifies those need areas that contribute to that level of risk to reoffend. And we supervise them according to that level of risk. And that's incredibly important. It kind of ties into a couple things that Mark had said. It's important that we supervise individuals at an appropriate level of supervision due to the fact you may have somebody who is at low risk to reoffend, they have a job, they have a supportive family, and they have a drug addiction. And they can go to treatment and maintain their job. Having them come into our department 3 times a month and disrupt that employment setting and taking them away from their home is incredibly disruptive. If somebody is at a higher level of risk to reoffend, then they're going to come in and see us more often. I want to circle back around, though, to those need areas that contribute to one's level of risk to reoffend. Oftentimes in the community we think, oh, they reoffend because they have a substance abuse problem, or they didn't finish high school, or they don't have employment. And really, some of the primary risk factors are criminal attitudes, thoughts, and beliefs, peer associations, and lack of pro-social support. And so within probation supervision, transitioning from a compliance-based supervision to more risk-based, we're targeting those areas. We want to get to the thoughts, attitudes, and behaviors. Anytime you want to change a behavior, you look towards those thoughts, feelings, and attitudes. And so officers are also spending a significant amount of time with probationers. There's active engagement not only around behavior change, but also accountability. And so if we want to talk about, it's more than just talking them through and being a support person. It's incorporating cognitive behavioral programming, skill building sessions, problem solving. It's about enhancing skill sets so that they can make sustainable change around their behavior. And that's much more involved than compliance-based supervision that we did, that I shared previously. I think a couple other things, as someone who's in a position of authority, it's important for probation supervision to be mindful of power hierarchies, as well as their unconscious bias. Those lead into our roles often. And it's something certainly to be mindful of. Mark had touched up also upon the drug treatment centers and getting individuals linked up with treatment and that type of thing. And so when we're looking at it from a larger perspective at the legislative level, funneling more money into the community in our drug treatment centers and our mental health providers. That is a huge problem, especially in the smaller counties in Ohio. Franklin County is incredibly fortunate to have the resources that we have available, but you go into these smaller counties, they don't have the resources available to them to refer probationers out to, and a lot of it is just that, let me help you, and I'm going to direct you on what you need to do, and I'm going to help you make these changes, and we need these other resources in the community to help to navigate through that, to get to sustainable change. So probation supervision, overall is really coming from a holistic approach. I think, again, Dr. Davis, Irene both spoke to that. Mark definitely brought up some areas within the system that need to be changed, and hopefully as communities or different decision points in the criminal justice system continue to come together, here in the near future, as we continue to talk about criminal justice reform, we will touch upon and active engagement around specifically a lot of the things that Mark identified here today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. We're going to jump right into questions with the time that we have remaining. We do have several that have been submitted. The first is actually looking at some of those collateral consequences that were mentioned earlier, particularly as it relates to housing. And so the question is, what policy solutions or programs are in place in Columbus to increase access to housing for individuals with criminal records? And then more broadly, is housing, or is a housing approach to reentry an effective approach in helping individuals become productive? And are there any other policy suggestions that you would put forth for the state of Ohio or for Columbus to adopt or implement on that basis? And whoever would like to answer can jump right in.
So, Irene, I'll jump in just to say the CQE, Certificate of Qualification for Employment, there has been an experimental housing study done on whether or not a person with an approved CQE can also use that to get housing. And what that study showed is that individuals have used it and have been able to get housing. And that study was conducted here in Franklin County. And that individual, the researcher, Peter Leisure, is actually working on another study with housing here in Franklin County to determine what helps individuals and why they're being denied. And I can tell you that the certificate has been used. Individuals put on their application, even though the intent is employment, that they also needed to be able to obtain housing. So individuals have used the CQE to get an apartment or to rent from a landlord. So, in that regard, yes, there are things that are out there. There also is a group here in Franklin County on the advisory board who are working on a certificate of qualification for housing that would kind of mirror what the CQE does, but it would be for housing. So there is conversations, there is activity around providing individuals with some sort of housing relief who have a criminal history, and that is the reasoning for not being able to obtain housing. So I think that here in Franklin County, there is some movement towards trying to assist individuals with criminal records with housing.
Wonderful, thank you. Anybody else have anything to add?
Hey, Kari, this is Mike. I just wanted to jump in again. One of the things that living in the pandemic has showed us is it's exacerbated conditions that exist in some of our more fragile communities. So the issue of housing, even for people without criminal convictions, has become an issue. You know, employment, all of these things that have, I guess, been social determinants of health, evident that there are weaknesses, fragilities in these areas that contribute to instability. We have to be intentional in our approaches to the conditions into which people find themselves with criminal convictions. One of the things I just wanted to say is the allocation of resources is often based on what we know a population to be in a specific zip code, a specific area. But one of the things we know about the criminal justice system, and we've heard it from all of the panelists, is it's cyclical. People go in and they come back out. And there's this, for lack of a better term, this shadow population that we know is returning to specific zip codes. Mark mentioned Linden. So we know the 43211 zip code is going to get more returns than, say, Grandview we know that 43203 is going to get more returns than the 43209 zip code. And so we have to be more intentional at addressing the lack of resources where we know more people will be than what's available via the current structure.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Any others that would like to add before we move on to the next question?
Kari, I would just really like to just very briefly, I'm so happy whoever asked that question, and I'm so happy that I'm going to get Irene's number, because I get that question all the time, and it's usually from a client who's completed probation, who hasn't expunged their felony yet, and how do I get into a partner? This apartment won't rent to me, this and that. And I don't have the answers. And I feel as Defense Bar and the Columbus Bar Association, we need to do a better job helping in that situation, because it just, I don't have the answer, and I feel bad. I've been doing this for 27 years and I have no clue, because in my mind as a practitioner, wait, person's done, person's on probation, completed it. I lose track, and that's part of the process that we all have to do a better job. But a great question.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, each of you, for your responses. We're going to move right on to the next question, which again is for anyone who would like to respond. And the question is, what have been the biggest challenge or biggest changes, excuse me, that you've seen in the criminal justice system to deal with the disparate effects that the system has on people of color?
I guess I can go real quick. The first thing that comes to my mind is this change in the drug laws. In the federal system, you got penalized very severely, mandatory time, if you had crack cocaine on you, a very de minimis amount. However, if you had cocaine on you, and maybe you were from an affluent suburb and you got pulled over and you had a large amount of cocaine on you, you were basically going to get probation regardless. So that's one example of where the system was put in place, with the proper intention, but the unintended consequences is it had a terrible effect on the minority communities, and it really was devastating. And now in the federal system, they're actually last chance things and other things like this, second chance, all these different names of programs, because they're trying to correct the wrong that occurred on there. So off the top of my head, that's been the biggest thing that I've seen in terms of the mandatory drug laws and the mandatory penalties.
Thank you. Anybody else want to share some changes that they've seen from their perspective? No? All right. Well, I'm going to move on to the next question then. Thank you, Mark, for your response. The next question I have is, what types of programs, we've talked before, and Lori specifically, we're talking about criminal thinking, and that being sort of an indicator of success or failure kind of moving through the program. So what types of programs actually work in changing criminal thinking and actually help people to be successful after serving their time or while on community control? Lori, I think we'll have you go ahead and let me make sure. For some reason, your mute button just wants to stay muted. So let's do that.
Carl,
okay, you're all set.
I could just jump in real quick until Lori unmutes. One of the things I think we was discussed a little earlier, Lori talked about, but one of the things I wanted to mention from a correction standpoint, Irene mentioned, and that was our opening up our system, allowing for our community partners to have more access to the men and women who are incarcerated prior to release. So in keeping with the idea that successful reentry starts at admission, introducing those community partners that are going to implement evidence-based approaches prior to release has been significant for us. I think one of the things it does, Lori sort of mentioned, it helps develop and build relationship. It builds trust, and there are modeling and mentoring aspects that we've seen positive results from. Lori, thanks for letting me jump in there.
Sure, no problem. Am I on?
Yeah, yep, you're on.
Sorry. Sorry, I just didn't see myself pop up there, sorry. So in relation to the type of programming that is found to be valuable and showing the best results, it's cognitive behavioral programming. That is the type of programming that has been proven to have an effect on recidivism and reducing risk. The truth is we have to get to the thinking behind the behavior. As I touched on earlier, it is about, even if you're not in the criminal justice system and you're trying to change a behavior, it's your attitudes and thoughts and attitudes and beliefs towards that behavior that you want to change. So it's really, really critical for probation, community supervision departments, probation departments, community providers of the type of programming that they're providing, that it's CBT, it's cognitive behavioral programming. Some of the programming that we are familiar with and that we've used in our department is Thinking for a Change, which is a cognitive-based program model. It's a 22 session model, I believe, and it covers social skills, problem solving, proper engagement with one another. We also use a thinking errors curriculum. There's decision points. The other side to this too is when we are referring individuals out into the community for drug treatment, we've been partnering with community agencies to truly help them understand the criminal justice population. Somebody who is in the criminal justice population with a substance abuse problem is really different than someone who is a pro-social individual with a substance abuse problem. And so we, actually the University of Cincinnati has done a really great job of developing a curriculum around core correctional practices. And they have curriculums for substance abuse, employment, sex offending behavior, a myriad of different behavior change models. And so it's important, again, I just need to emphasize that cognitive behavioral programming is the type of programming that is most effective with behavior change, whether you're in the criminal justice system or if you are a pro-social individual.
Hey, Kari, it's Irene. I'd just like to jump in real quick and just say this. Programming is great. However, if the person that is in the program, as Lori said earlier, if I'm in a program and I can't relate to the person who's administering that program and they don't have a clue about my history or my culture, I may not adapt with that particular teaching. So we have to be mindful that we can have all the evidence-based programming, you know, available. However, we need to make sure that that person is comfortable, that we have a relationship where that person is trusting enough to want to open up and want to participate voluntarily and give of themselves to make that change. Because if the person administering the program is just doing it because they've been trained to do it and they have no feelings for the individuals who are involved in that class, folks are not going to get what we're trying to give them. So I just think in the system, we need to make sure that it's relatable and there's a relationship there that will integrate what we're trying to achieve with the evidence-based programs.
Absolutely. Thank you, Irene. Mark, you had something you wanted to share as well?
I do briefly, and just to go to more of a fundamental concept and what Doctor's saying, and Lori and Irene, when I'm dealing with clients, the day they get sentenced to prison or potentially they realize they're going to go to prison, it's their worst day. It's catastrophic. And so from a defense standpoint, if we can give them hope, and what I mean by that, so when the legislature finally had the deal to do with judicial release, that gives my clients hope. I see more positive things from judicial release I can be in front of Judge McIntosh and the guy might be going away or the lady might be going away for 6 or 7 years, but he looks at them in the eye and says, if you do well, I will consider a judicial release, and this is what I'm looking for. I then get correspondence from my clients in prison. Hey, I'm doing this. This is going well. How, do you think this helps on my judicial? And it's just hope. I'm in front of other judges where they don't ever have a chance of getting a judicial release. And I see my clients, just the hope goes out of their body. And so to me, it's that fundamental level of, if they have hope and they have a path forward that they can trust and believe in, and based on everything else the other three just said, I think that's our best options.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I just wanted to jump in because
Yeah.
Mark said something that triggered something. One of the things, that the idea of hope, and also attempting to sort of mitigate the impact of historic distrust of the criminal justice system. I think one of the things we're attempting to get better at is to listen to people, to hear what they're saying. Irene and Lori both mentioned it earlier, and Mark and his discussions with clients. What is it like? What is the lived experience of these individuals who intersect with the criminal justice system like? What has been their experience with us? As we see across the country, people are crying out, listen to us. Here's what we have to say. And so one of the things we've attempted to implement at DRC is so the reestablishment of the Family Advisory Council, to use those family members to share with us how we could be better, how we could resolve some of the issues, say with visitation or with other means and forms of communication. This has been big, as Irene mentioned. Some of it is about relationship, and quite honestly, I know, at least from the prison parole perspective, I'm sure it's that way for Lori. We often have competing priorities of safety and security, while also wanting to facilitate programming and things of that nature. Sometimes those priorities bump up against each other. But when we've created avenues and lanes for open communication, for the facilitation of hope, for more transparency, we see more effective outcomes with the tools and mechanisms that are in play for all of us.
Thank you. Absolutely. The next question that we have is directed towards Mark, but certainly if other folks have information, they can share as well. But the question is, Mark, why do you feel like there is resistance at the state level to make some of the recommendations that you made when you're looking at the state versus political, or versus the federal system? Is that a political issue that's kind of getting held back there? And is there anything that you feel like the bar can do generally to assist you or assist that sort of to move things forward?
That's a great question. Unfortunately, I could probably sit here for 2 or 3 hours and talk about those, but let's see, breaking it down. Yes, the difficulties with the state are we have 88 counties and 88 criminal justice systems for common pleas, municipal, and things like that. And they all do it their own way, so to speak. And it's very difficult to get a game plan or something like that. And it is, at times it is political. It is political as to what money is going to be spent where and how's that going to look to this. And politicians are making decisions based on how it's going to look. And I mean, today I was going through information and reading stuff online, and our Attorney General is considering filing a lawsuit against the Big Ten so Ohio State can maybe play football. So again, is that good use of our resources by our Attorney General's office? And so there's always politics in it, and that's what's frustrating. And yes, each bar association needs to do a better job of trying to make things more consistent and productive. And I mean, I think that's part of the aspect you asked us to talk about, is how to be a productive person on parole or post-release control or on probation. And it all comes back to communication and trust and the things that everyone said. But yes, unfortunately, I think because our state is so diverse and so many different areas that have different, both political beliefs. Yes, politics plays a part of it, unfortunately, and that's what's frustrating when I go to 2 hearings in federal court and my people are charged with very serious crimes and they're people of color and they're out and they're being productive, but I come to state court, depending on which jurisdiction, and I don't have a chance in hell of getting that person out and getting services in place. And so that's the frustration for the defense bar.
Absolutely. Anybody else want to add a response to that question? For changes that way? Okay, we'll move right on then. Have there been any changes, or excuse me, have there been any challenges in creating community partnerships to take on a balanced approach in creating the wellness producing environments in an attempt to attack recidivism?
Yeah, Card, thank you for the question. Certainly, I do think this about the prison system. It's easy to point the finger this way. I mean, we're a custodial, agency, and so we get in the pipeline who comes to us, and there's often I think a tendency to kind of find out what's going on in the system, and rightly so. Are we providing those supports and treatments, and are we treating people humanely? I mean, certainly that needs to be evaluated, considered, and it needs to be transparency relative to that. But there's also, and Mark was sort of speaking to it, the reality is if we do everything correctly in our system, if we hit every cognitive behavioral program just right, we meet every risk and need, the reality is that approximately 95% of all those who are currently in custody in our prison systems are returning to the local community. And so the question is, have we been intentional in our address of the things that will determine whether or not they're going to be successful? Most of those things that have to do with recidivism, for example, extend beyond the reach of the Department of Corrections. And so issues like housing and employment, access to healthcare, transportation. I know growing up in Columbus, it was always an issue for those on the east side where I'm from. And when I was a teenager, and there being big warehouses on the west side, there was no transportation from the east side to the west side from some of those jobs. And so issues like that aren't necessarily related to crime have a ripple effect and determine certainly the collective efficacy of communities, whether or not we have enhanced public safety. And so I would just say, kind of an answer to the question in a roundabout way, that it is challenging when focus is solely on what's occurring behind the gate, and there isn't a two-pronged or systematic approach that extends a hand in, but also walks people back into community. And Irene could probably chime in on this, but it never ceases to amaze me of how much of the advocacy for humane treatment and for programming and services ends when people head out the door going back home.
Thank you. Irene, did you want to add something to that?
Or I'll just very briefly just say that Mike's right. The department is held accountable for individuals both while incarcerated and then when they leave, and we hand them off to our community partners and to the communities. And then, but what are the communities doing to enhance what we may have already started? And so better collaborations, with probation, with defense bar, with folks who are trying to help these people successfully transition back is a big piece. And I think that, yeah, we're challenged as a system to get better.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, I'm gonna try to just jump back into the next question. And that is, for any panelists, do you feel that it would be helpful if we had substance abuse treatment programs in our local jail facilities? That treatment could be given if someone can't make bail or if they're doing local time on a case. The thinking being that it's important that neighborhood environments need to be addressed, or the likelihood of reoffending is likely. So again, whoever would like to respond can jump in first, but whether or not you think that we're, and it looks like Lori would like to be that person. Yes, Lori, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I'll tell you, that's an interesting concept, and there is incredible value in considering that option. For the mere fact of that, well, two things. One, you have a captive audience, and perhaps over a period of time, they're sober, right? They're no longer under the influence of drugs. They're in a different space in mind, and again, you have a captive audience. The other side of that is it also gives the jail the opportunity to show themselves as an advocate, somebody who is interested in their success, and that they are also a contributing link to this journey on their as they progress through the system. And so I think where the challenge is obviously is getting the room, the spacing available, from the security aspect, getting deputies to help monitor that, and that type of thing. But it's definitely something that it's a very viable consideration. I think I would also offer, in relation to this question, and just to piggyback on some of the responses on the other, we're fortunate that we have the Criminal Justice Planning Board here in Franklin County, led by the Office of Homeland and Justice Policy Programs. And so a lot of community partners are involved in that Criminal Justice Planning Board, and the sheriff is very active on that board. And so there have been various dialogues around offering programming in the jail system, and with the development of the new jail and creating space for that to happen. So I do think here in Franklin County, that's something that is something that's on the horizon. And interestingly enough, even classification, we talk about risk-based supervision or risk levels of supervision in probation systems. You're now seeing even in the jails classification levels of individuals in the jail. And so you're not mixing, they want to get to a place of where they're not mixing risk levels within the jail, and so that leads to environments of more productivity. So which again would be a nice option to have that available in the jails. And I know that they have those in the prisons, and so there's a lot to learn from the prison system and how you can apply that in the jail system.
If I can, Corey, I just want to piggyback on that. It kind of brought up something to me. Most of my clients, they don't trust anything. From the minute they get into the system, they distrust the entire process, especially people of color. And so the more we can treat them with dignity and respect, and the more we can get them to trust us, even from the get-go at the jail, in terms of that type of treatment, stuff like that, it's only going to help them believe in the system and believe in the process and trust myself, trust the judge, even trust the prosecutor, trust their probation officer and parole. The more trust we can build from the get-go, the better off we can be.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all. The time is approaching 1:30, which is our cutoff time, but if there was something specific that you wanted to make sure that you addressed today but haven't been given the opportunity to do so, I want to give each of our panelists that opportunity now, or forever hold your peace. All right, hearing none. Thank you all who have participated today by submitting your questions. Thank you to each of our panelists for sharing your expertise and experience. We couldn't do this without you, and so we absolutely value your time and your participation today. I do want to just say a quick note to those of us who are still on the call. This does conclude our Race in the Criminal Justice series for our community conversations, but the conversation is going to continue. Our next conversation series is a two-part series that will begin in October, and it's called Inclusive Democracy, looking at elections and voting. Our first session for that will be Thursday, October 1st from 12 to 1:30, looking at election protection, ballots, barriers, and the backbone of democracy. Our second will be Thursday, November 12th from 12 to 1:30, which is going to be election dissection, sort of looking back at Popular Votes, Electoral College, and the peaceful transitions of power. So we hope that you will continue to tune in with us, to submit your questions for those as well. And we will look forward to seeing you all again in October. Thank you so much.